All right, good evening. Welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here. It's so great to see such a great crowd here in our courtroom, historic courtroom in the federal building where at one time long ago the FBI was located. This was where it was home base, probably dating back to the 40s, early 50s. Tonight we're going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office in Las Vegas. Over the course of the next hour or so, we'll hear from 7 individuals who have worked in the Las Vegas office from the 1960s through today. Before we get started, I want to very briefly provide some historical context for our conversation. There are people in this room who know all of this like the back of their hand, and there are others who may not know very much of it at all. So I want to be sure we have our historical context. The Bureau of Investigation, not yet known as the FBI, was created in 1908 during the administration of President Theodore Roosevelt. It was a relatively small agency at first, with limited tools to fight crime. In those days, the dominant federal agency, law enforcement agency, was the Secret Service. But after J. Edgar Hoover was appointed director of the Bureau of Investigation in 1924, he set to work reforming and expanding the agency. In the early 1930s, Hoover took the lead in pursuing high-profile bank robbers and kidnappers, ultimately killing or capturing John Dillinger, Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, lots of nicknames, Babyface Nelson, and Alvin Karpis, among many others. In 1935, the Bureau of Investigation was officially renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, thus the FBI. Before the Las Vegas field office was established in 1961, the state of Nevada was overseen by the Salt Lake City field office. Around 1940 or so, Salt Lake set up a resident agency in Las Vegas led by Agent William Coulthard. In 1946, the FBI sent several agents to Las Vegas to investigate Benjamin Bugsy Siegel during construction of the Flamingo Hotel. We did a lot of research on FBI involvement in Las Vegas in those early years, and there were agents here all the time. And they were a lot of smaller things, at least as far as what you saw in the newspapers, a lot of training sessions, they had a conference here in 1941, car thefts, all kinds of different things. But probably one of the bigger ones was investigating Bugsy Siegel. Today, the FBI has 56 field offices across the country, 350 resident agencies, and more than 90 offices in other countries. So within that broad context, our program tonight will focus on the Las Vegas field office and the many fascinating cases it has investigated over the past 6 decades. So here's how we're going to do this. We have 7 speakers total, but they will not all be on stage at one time. They will come up in 3 separate groups. This may be a little clunky here and there, but so please bear with us as our panelists move on and off the stage. We're going to start in the early years. That's where we're starting. We want to understand the origins of the field office. And with us, we have, to my far left is James Kramer, worked for the FBI in an administrative capacity from 1959 to 1994, 35 years. He became chief clerk of the Las Vegas field office in 1962, just a few months after the office was established. Please welcome Jim Kramer. Next to Jim is Judge Bill Jansen. Many of you know Bill. He is currently a Las Vegas Justice of the Peace and has been so since 1985. Senior judge, I apologize. He previously worked for 23 years with the FBI. Jansen received his undergraduate degree from Michigan State University and his JD from Drake University in Iowa. Please welcome Judge Jansen. And next to me is Johnny Smith, who began his FBI career in 1964 as a file clerk in the El Paso division. In 1969, he graduated from the University of Texas at El Paso and was accepted as a special agent with the FBI. He was assigned to the Kansas City field office, where he worked on the organized crime squad. In 1970, he transferred to the San Francisco division's Berkeley resident agency, where he investigated domestic terrorism. In 1973, he was transferred to Las Vegas, where he worked for 22 years. Please welcome Johnny Smith. So we're going to start with Jim. Jim was here right after the field office was formed. And what I thought if you could do, Jim, is kind of explain what the reasons were for the creation of the field office and what were some of that, what was it like in those early years?
Well, when I came into the office, it was formed basically from the organized crime squad. They had so many cases and so forth in Las Vegas that they disconnected from not El Paso, but Utah, the field office up there. When I came in, basically they were 4 short. We had about 22 agents and we had something like 17 support personnel. Being short about 4 people, we had a lot of cases and a lot of things. We were still getting files from Salt Lake City. We get the indices from Salt Lake City. We had to put all that together to get it going. And then basically from that point on, we just handled the agents, support for the agents. Then in 1976, basically, we left the field office on Bridger and 11th Street. And before we walked into the post office, not the post office, but the federal building. On the second floor in the federal building, again, we had to move. Now, the support staff basically did a lot of the moving, and that's what we got caught up into. And then, like I said, that took a lot of time to move everything, move indices, move files, move everything to get it. There's a lot of work in it. So we basically, like that, we stayed in that office until 1988. At that time, basically, we built out on Charleston. And at that point, basically, all the support staff basically moved that office ourselves. Basically, we had the agents pack up their stuff, and they said, okay, we're going to go, and we left. And like I said, then in 88, came back down to, just handling cases. A lot of it was organized crime stuff from 62 until I left, actually. Basically, in 94, they were still working organized crime cases. But we handled all of the support staff. We had the teletypes, typing, bulky basically storage, security, the office, and so forth. So it was a big task, and we did it.
Jim, just to sort of explain, I think it's worth noting the places where the FBI was located in town. Now, before you got here, we know early on they were in this building, but after that they went to Fremont Street, right? Right,
that's right. They went to a drugstore on the second floor of the drugstore on 300 Fremont Street, and that's actually where they started in 1960. John Williams was promoted to SAC. They started their agency in that area. And then when the building was built on 11th and Bridger, then they moved into 11th and Bridger about 1961. And that's when we started really cutting down and looking at files and so forth and going after the organized crime scene.
And I believe, for those who are trying to picture this, we're talking about just 2 blocks from the Ma Museum south, and it's on 3rd and Fremont, and there's a big gift shop on that corner now, and on the second floor, that's where the FBI was.
Right.
Pretty interesting how these things evolve. Let's switch over to Judge Jansen. Now, you started in the field office in 1967, so you're one of the elder statesmen here.
That's right. This on? Yes.
It is, yes.
I started in 1967. I came here in September 1967, and when I arrived here, it was about 100 and some degrees. We had no air conditioning in the bureau cars. And I just want you to know, this is how we had to dress under the Hoover administration. We had to wear the Hoover blues, the tie, no mustache, and no beard. That was the requirement. So put in the car with 110, 112 degrees with no air conditioning. It was brutal out there. And we had to do that for about 2 years.
So, Bill, when you came to Las Vegas in those early years, what kinds of cases were you working on?
I'm going to give just a little history. When President Kennedy was elected the President of the United States, he nominated his brother, Bobby Kennedy, to be the Attorney General. He directed Bobby Kennedy to initiate laws that will interfere with the actions of the mob. A law of what we call the Interstate Transportation and Aid of Racketeering was passed. That meant that any information, any piece of equipment that is sent from one state to another and used for an illegal purposes, it's a violation of federal law. One of the main components that they wanted to attack was the bookmaking operation of the mob. And that's brought in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, we were told by other offices that they were getting the line and from Las Vegas, and who's ever sending it, we had to find out. So we set up a surveillance on Churchill Downs. Now, Churchill Downs was the main book area at that time. It was the end of the strip, across from, I think, like the Luxor Hotel. Monday morning, when the line comes out, all the bookmakers come running out. And they're heading for phones to give out information. We had a squad of about 6 or 7 agents that we called the bookie squad. And we followed these individuals, found them to telephones, and if we could stand next to them and hear them give information over the line, over the telephone to people in other states. We then get the number from that telephone and trace it to where the call was made, like in Florida, Chicago, what have you. They always had a pattern. So we always had a time element. If it's a certain time, this bookie here will call on this phone, then we knew where he'd be calling from, or calling to, and then we would have the person at the other end surveilled. This went on. They also sent out individuals from their areas to be bookies and to get the line and transport it back. The layoff pay was, the money was going to a race and sports book by the name of the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl was located at the Sands and the Strip. The person operating the Rose Bowl was Lefty Rosenthal. He was the operator. The money was coming and being backed by Jerry Zerowitz of Caesar's Palace. That's where the money was. That's where the backing was. We went in several times and observed different people making bets who came from telephones to the book and placed bets. On mid-December, we raided the Rose Bowl, and Lefty was there. And when the people made the bets, they said, this is number 24. They didn't give names. This is number 24. This is number 38, making bets. In the books, they had listed who the individual was, who was number 24, who was number 28. And we confiscated everything, but I was told outside that Lefty's attorney wants to come in. And I said, no, he's not coming in. I'm in charge of the raid. He wants to come in. No. Wait till afterwards. Well, afterwards, everything was done. Guess who his attorney was? Oscar Goodman. That's my first meeting with Oscar Goodman. He was there with a flowery shirt and what have you, hollering, screaming, why didn't you let me in? I said, we were in charge of the raid. Now you can come in, you can talk to your client. We didn't interview him. We did not interview him at all. But after that, the Gaming Commission took the license away from the Rose Bowl and closed it down because some of the money that was using in the bets and that was coming from other areas across in the east with mob connections. So it was some of the mob money. And that's the reason they closed it down. So that was a big area that I worked into and tried to, knock that out of Las Vegas, and we shut it down.
Working. There it is. Johnny, I want to switch gears and talk to you for a minute. You came to Las Vegas in 1973. Correct. And there's some really big cases. I know there may be a few people in the audience who know a lot about these cases, but I think we can't do this 60-year anniversary without talking about a couple of these. One was the Carrie Saig kidnapping, which happened in 1978. Can you talk a little bit about what happened, how big a deal that was?
Sure. Carrie Saig went to a Jewish school over off Maryland Parkway, and one day he was out to recess and didn't come back. We had some reports that a vehicle of some sort, not very well described, picked him up, but very little information. And very quickly, the kidnappers contacted the family. The family was the owner of the carpet barn, who used to be, not the new carpet barn, but the old carpet barn. And they knew he had substantial funds, and they demanded funds. The office comprised of about 45 agents at the time. All 45 of us were out on the street, knocking on doors, talking to anybody we could, talking to the family, setting up surveillance of the family, and very soon we ran out of manpower. So agents from San Francisco, Sacramento, Salt Lake came in. I don't remember the final count, but because it was a kidnapping, we also worked with Metro. So what we did to maximize the manpower is we put one agent and one Metro officer per car. And that's how we went and covered leads. That's how we did surveillances. We very soon developed a suspect. He came forward, and it was a fellow by the name of Jerry Burgess, who's still around Las Vegas now. He had said that the kidnappers contacted him, and they gave him one of the child's shoes. He brought the shoe to the family to identify as, and he said the kidnappers want him to be the go-between. We suspected that he was more than the go-between. Unfortunately, the child was never found. It was never recovered. My personal thought on that is that during the kidnapping, he tried to sedate him and gave him too much, killed him. He tried to cover his mouth to keep him from screaming. Something happened. I don't think he intended to kill him, but I think that he probably accidentally killed him, and then he still wanted to get the money, so he continued with the scheme. He was tried in state court, but without a body, it's very difficult to convict someone. And an interesting sidelight is one of the interviews, we were all over town interviewing everyone and anyone we could think of. One of the sidelights that I personally was involved in is I was contacted by a woman who said that Jerry Burgess, just a very short time before the kidnapping, had raped her, had taken her out in a car, took her out to the desert and raped her. And I told her, I said, well, because the time has lapsed, it'd be very, very difficult, and there's no witnesses, it'd be very, very difficult to get a conviction, but please, report this, make an official report to the police department in case he raped someone else. Well, the officer that I was working with took the report, filed it with the district attorney's office, and the district attorney said, well, let's try it. We'll go to trial. So we went to trial and found him guilty of rape. He was never found guilty of the kidnapping, but he was found guilty of several other crimes that he had committed over the years.
Very good. That's a good summary. And I guess because he was acquitted on the first trial, that case is still an open case today.
The case is still open, but I'm in contact with the father still. In fact, I saw him last Friday. This was a long time ago, but he still grieves over his son.
Yeah. So, Judge Jansen, you were here at that time. Were you handling like the public communications at that time?
Yes.
It's on.
I was the press. I handled the press for the FBI from 1975 to 1985 when I retired. In 1975, they said that every field office should have a press agent because if there's a major case and SAC, ASAC all tied up, they should have someone who give the information. And I was the information officer for the Carrie Say kidnapping case. Yes, that's true.
What was the public's What was the public's mood about this? What was happening at that time?
Well, it was a serious case. It was a little boy, and they all, when they ask, you have any leads? Are you close to catching the person? And you can only say so much because it's an ongoing investigation. But they were concerned, very much so, and they made national headlines, and it was a very popular case, important case in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. All right, so we need to keep moving along. We could do a whole program on each of these cases. Johnny, let's talk about another big one from right around that time, the Harvey's bombing. Harvey's was a resort up at South Lake Tahoe, not in Las Vegas, but this is, the FBI field office covered the entire state. So tell us a little bit about that.
We had many extortion cases of casinos, but this particular one was interesting, to say the least, and caused the most destruction. A disgruntled gambler who had lost a huge sum of money to Harvey's constructed and put in a bomb that was the size of a Xerox machine, and they rolled it into the I can't remember what floor it was, but second floor of the casino, and they had over the case IBM. So nobody confronted them and said, "What are you doing?" They just said, "We're delivering this machine." So they left it there, and when it was inspected, there was a note on it demanding money. The attempts to make a payoff failed. It was bad instructions. It was in Lake Tahoe, the second tree from the left, and it was not good. So the payoff was never made, and all the bomb experts that we called in said, we think that the top of the machine, there was like a small box on top of the Xerox machine, and they said, we think that is the brains of the bomb. Other than that, we have determined that there's levelers, so you can't tip it; it'll go off. He had I think they determined 8 fail safes. Thank you. That if you try to tamper with it, screws, that you couldn't get it off. So the bomb experts said, we think that top is a brains. If we put a small charge on it and blow that top off, I think that will make the bomb inert. Well, it wasn't. The culprit was finally caught. We had some information from a disgruntled girlfriend. I think it was a girlfriend of one of his sons who had heard about it. If you're ever a criminal, treat your girlfriends correctly because they're gonna come back to haunt you. And the man who actually set the bomb, he died in jail of cancer, and his 2 Confederates that helped him move it into the casino, they did, I think, 7 years apiece.
There was one piece in there that, if it wasn't clear, the bomb did go off, and the hotel was evacuated, and so no one was hurt. But it caused $18 million in damage to the resort. But what happened the next day?
Well, the next day after the bomb went off, the casino, we were still investigating, and I didn't go up there. I had a trial, so I was not one of the ones that went to state line to do the investigation. But the next day, the casino put a plexiglass wall between our investigation, where we were looking for all the parts and pieces, and the casino, so that the casino patrons could watch us do our work
Boy,
while gambling.
wild gambling.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Is that a minute? Is this on?
It's on.
The people that did this, they had a note there, and they say you're supposed to go so much longitude, latitude, and there'll be a light. And on that light, is this on? Yeah.
I'm going to bring in a new one.
Go ahead and talk into that one.
Yeah, okay. And there'll be a light. Well, the helicopter went over there was no light. So they didn't know where to drop it. Well, what we found out later on was they were from Fresno, California. They brought the strobe lights in, but they forgot to bring the batteries. So now they're going back to get the batteries, and on the way back, they get in an automobile accident, and they both end up in the hospital. So that was the end of that. I thought it was a little tip.
Sure. So one more story we need to tell, very important story for this event tonight, and that is the murder of John Bailey, the FBI agent. And Johnny, if you want to sort of summarize that.
John Bailey was a friend of mine. He worked in the desk right in front of me, and we worked white-collar crime at the time. And it's always, follow the money, follow the money. So he had subpoenaed some records from a bank here in town, and was on his way to the bank, picked up the records, sitting there talking to the bank employee that was supplying the records for his financial crime case, and the teller screams, I've been robbed, he's got a gun. So at the time, the robber turns around, starts walking out the door. John sees him, draws his gun, and says, halt, FBI. And the guy turns around with his gun, pointing at John's direction. So John shot a round off and went right by the guy's head, missed him, hit the glass all over the floor. So FBI agents are nice people. So it didn't make him lay down on the glass and get cut. So he asked the bank employee to get a chair for him. So he got a chair for him, set him in the chair. He's there to pick up records. He didn't have his handcuffs on him, which some of us don't. In my day, you took them when you wanted to do something. Later on, you're going to talk to or hear Steve Martinez. He had a arrest where he had his cuffs on him, and he arrested the guy. But anyway, so John puts him on the floor. In the chair, not on the floor. Says to the bank employee, here's the keys to my FBI car. It's right out there. Go get my handcuffs. Told him where he was. He keeps his gun on the bad guy, gives instructions to call the police and call the FBI. And the bank employee comes back and hands John the cuffs, at which point the bad guy jumps out of the chair. John was not a very big guy. He was extremely good in shape, but not extremely very big. So it knocked him down. They were rolling on the floor, and they rolled by the bad guy's gun, who had not been picked up yet. He grabbed his gun, shoots John once. John goes limp. He gets up and shoots him again. John lived to the hospital, and then he died. That guy, we found him, again, brought in agents from all over the place. We're talking to all kinds of people. We ultimately find the shooter in Juarez, Mexico, across from El Paso, and we arrest him there, bring him back here. He gets tried in state court. At that time, there was no federal death penalty, and we thought that kind of crime deserved a death penalty. So he was tried in state court. He was convicted, sentenced to death. Many years later, in fact, a federal judge ruled that John had investigated the sitting district court judge for an alleged crime and found there was nothing to it. But she said that might have been a reason the judge might have made some unfavorable rulings. Therefore, the bad guy, the killer, had to be retried. So that trial is currently scheduled for May of 2022. May 23rd, 2022. So these things, they never go away. They never go away.
Can I,
Yep.
in the bomb, is this on?
It is. Sometimes it is.
No,
Sometimes.
I just came in from a couple weeks ago. I was up in the Reno area, and I was told that several. Is it on now? Yeah, it's on. Is it on? On?
It should be, but here you go.
I don't have any light. Yeah, John, that's intriguing me though. All right, I guess this is all right.
You're wearing out
Anyway,
this microphone.
They have several bombing experts that are trying to duplicate and rebuild this bomb, and they can't do it. They haven't been able to do so. It was so complex that they're unable to do so. So, I'm going to tell you. Let me have two stories. All right,
Okay,
you'll
well,
like this. All right, you'll like this. When we were surveilling the bookmakers in Churchill Downs, they used to come out, and there's a little midget, Bobby the midget. Now, Bobby goes to the phone. They had pay phones out in front of Churchill. So he goes, and he's short, so he jumps to put the quarters in. And we used to count how many times he jumped. He'd say, okay, he jumped 17 times. That's Miami, 12 times, whatever it is. And we were usually right. Bobby always came to some of my campaign parties. But anyway, several days later, or years later, I was on the bench. And who walks in but Bobby the midget? Bobby the midget said, may I approach the bench, Your Honor? I said, sure. So he comes up. He goes like this. He goes like this. Where am I calling? I said Alcatraz for cell reservation. the courtroom roared. One more story and I'm out. We had a sting operation here with the FBI and Metro, where we bought stolen properties and what have you. So this dude comes in with this Cadillac and wanted to sell it. So we gave him a couple dollars. And we checked out, and guess whose Cadillac it was that he stole? Oscar Goodman's. That is the true story. So now we couldn't have Oscar come down and pick it up. So what are you going to do? I said, all right, we're going to take this car, and we took it to Bruce in Charleston. There was a Skag score there. And we parked it in the parking lot, and then we gave a call to Metro, anonymous call to Metro, and said, there's a stolen Cadillac, license plate so-and-so, parked in the parking lot. Oscar got his car back.
Thank you, Judge. Those are great. I think what we should do here is we'll give a round of applause for this group, and we're going to bring up our next group. Thank you. All right, so our next group is Dennis Arnoldy and Herm Groman. If you guys can come up. While we're making this transition, I should mention, for those who've been to the museum programs a number of times, this individual, Bobby, that's not the first time he's been discussed on this stage. That has come up a number of times. So with this second group, we're going to talk about the mob. So we're going to fit right in with the mission of the museum and get right to the heart of it. All right. Immediately to my left is Dennis Arnoldy. Dennis served as an FBI agent from 1971 to 1997. After stints in El Paso, Texas, and Little Rock, Arkansas, he was assigned to the Las Vegas office in 1980. He was the case agent involved in the arrest of the Hole in the Wall gang when it tried to burglarize the Bertha's home furnishing store on July 4th, 1981, and we'll talk about that. He was responsible for debriefing Frank Collada, the mastermind of the Hole in the Wall gang, who became a cooperating witness in the case. We'll talk about that as well. Please welcome Dennis Arnoldy. And to my far left is Herm Groman. During his FBI career, Herm Groman specialized in deep, long-term undercover operations in the areas of organized crime and narcotics in Detroit and in Las Vegas. He also served as the agent in charge of several public corruption investigations. Later, he worked as a team leader for an FBI special operations group that conducted surveillances of major terrorist cells and their associates throughout the United States. Before joining the FBI, he served in the infantry in Vietnam, awarded both the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star. Please welcome Herm Groman. So we'll start with you, Dennis. We're going to talk about the mob. That's sort of your area of expertise, or one of them. And so why don't we talk about when you arrived in Las Vegas, and the mob was like almost the height of the mob's involvement here in the 70s and 80s. What did it look like? What was the landscape like when you arrived?
Well, the landscape of the town, of course, was quite different than it is now. And of course, the Strip was the place. The Chicago outfit was the major organized crime people in this city. And they ran the city, the organized crime part of it. Any other criminal families that wished to come in without a courtesy would introduce themselves to the Chicago guys and then give permission to do whatever they wish to do. And Chicago usually got a little back on it. Chicago was the force in this community. There was no doubt about it. When I got here from Little Rock, Arkansas, we didn't have quite that crime problem. We had crime problem, but not like that. I just like to throw something interesting in. They mentioned in this last 3 people up here about the Say kidnapping and the bombing in Tahoe. Well, the first things that happened to me when I got here, and this is 2 years later after the kidnapping, the SAC, great Joe Yablonsky, had me review that whole case to see if there was anything wrong. And everything was done complete. It was perfect. Not anything was wrong, but if they missed anything. And after that, after I spent some time doing that, the next thing they did, they sent me up to Tahoe. And so I guess I was a new guy on the block. I had to leave. So I spent Halloween up in Tahoe. So I worked with both those 2 cases. It's kind of interesting. I hadn't expected either. But what those 2 cases taught me, after looking through one and working the other one, is this office was terrific. The work those agents did, and they were all very, very good, was very complex, very difficult, and all those agents should be congratulated. And that continued. Let me tell you, after I came back and signed to the FBI, the Organized Crime Squad, it was the same thing. That whole office was putting people in jail and doing the right thing, and not just the organized crime.
So let's talk about the kind of the I guess high point or low point, depending on how you look at it. The Bertha's burglary, July 4th, 1981. You guys knew this was going to happen, and can you kind of explain how that?
Yes, a little background. Tony Spilotro was the head guy from the Chicago outfit here. He was sent out here originally in the 70s, and he was supposed to help at the Stardust with Lefty Rosenthal. If there was any problems, he could take care of them. He found that he had to have a crew to help him to take care of anything that could be wrong, and also to support him. So the crew was developed. Tony brought in his very good old friend, Frank Collada, from Chicago. And they got other people into the mob, or into the crew. The crew was designated as the Hole in the Wall Gang, not by Collada, who hated that title, but that's what the public knew them as. They had Leo Guardino and her, Joe Blasco, former police officer, Larry the Lurch Newman, who had killed about 4 people. And it was a very big and a very tough squad, believe me. And what they did is they started committing burglaries, committing arsons. Frank and Matecki murdered 1 witness, and it was just a constant thing. In fact, at that time, they were good for like 200 burglaries. Now, they had one interesting burglary. They hit a dope dealer's house. They didn't deal in dope, but if they could get that dope out, they could sell it and be done with it. And as they were in the middle of doing the burglary, one of the occupants came out of the shower. He had been in the shower, was totally naked, and he made an obscene gesture toward them. You can imagine what it was. And one of the hole-in-the-wall gang shot him in the leg. And so we, at that time, the FBI was surveilling these people almost 24 hours a day. And they were going to that place to surveil them. They had seen them, and all of a sudden they see all the burglars running out of the house. The FBI agents all turned around, thought they had been made, and so the whole thing was people were running from out of this house. That turned out to be a very important burglary, though. Later, when I was reviewing all the surveillance, we identified the burglary. Frank Collada took us to show me where it was, and eventually those people had to testify in court very well. But concerning Bertha's, the hole-in-the-wall gang had got information that Bertha's fine store, they sold silverware, and it was a big place to be. It was on East Sahara. Anybody here at that time, you might remember, it dealt in all the expensive stuff. They got the idea that they had a vault in there that contained over $1 million worth of property, and they were going to get it. Well, fortunately for us, in Tucson, Arizona, two agents, Don Sickles and Bill Christensen, had developed a source down there that they had caught, believe it or not, burglarizing laundromats. He was a sound guy named Sal Romano. He was a Chicago guy that was famous for doing breaking down sirens and that sort of thing. And so they converted him, they talked to him, and he, because he knew all the guys up here, came up here and met with Frank and met with the guys and was brought into their scheme. Frank didn't want him, he didn't like him, but Tony Spilotro, who ran the show, did like the guy. And so there we know. We had the information, we knew where they were going and when they were going to do this burglary, which would be on July 4th of '81. We were able to, and we were working, by the way, working hand in hand with the Metropolitan Police Department at that time. And so we had it all planned. Our surveillance squad was spending days and days surveilling the place. We had vans set up 24 hours a day. On the day that we knew it was going to happen, our vans are out there all day to the hot sun, July 4th. A couple of our agents got sick from the sun, had to be hospitalized, but they stayed there. The bad guys showed up, 4 of them showed up at about 8 o'clock at night. It had finally gotten dark, and they transported blowtorches, hacksaws, all sorts of things to the roof. Right there, right there, they found a place they could get on the roof. 2-story building, and then they started working on the front end of the building to put a hole in the building so they could get in the vault. Okay, myself, another agent, Jim Byers, and policeman, 2 police officers. I'm sorry, right this minute the names escape me, but they were all up there with us. We got up there behind it, and the building's a very long building. It's actually about 3 different buildings, but they all have the same roof. We were behind these huge air conditioners. I couldn't hear a thing. We had surveillance on another building that was looking down and recording the whole thing and was going to give us the, tell us when to go up and make the arrest. So we're waiting there. I get a call on my earphone, get ready to go up there. We're going to make the arrest now. So I alerted my companions, and then I get another message, stop it, stop it. They missed the vault. They had gone to the roof, and they missed the vault. So at that time, I felt like going up there and telling them, this is where the damn vault is. We start digging here. But I did, okay. And so we waited and waited. It's just hot as heck, and we got vests on, we got all this armament on us, and it was getting a little late. So it was around 10-ish or so, I get another call, go ahead. So we advanced on them. It was a long walk, actually. It's a long building. We had to get through different air conditioners. You couldn't believe the air conditioners up there. And then we finally came upon, and I yelled out, FBI, don't move. And they stopped immediately. One of them, Leo Guardino, who's the smallest guy, was half in the hole. So we got him out, and they cooperated. These guys are professionals, professional bad guys. They didn't carry guns. They knew if they were caught, just to be caught. Don't try anything. Of course, they had 4 shotguns aiming at them, so they knew better. We got them there. They had not been able to get into the vault, but they had entered the building, even though it was only Leo waist high, and so they had committed a burglary, a state charge, and they were arrested. We handcuffed them, got them down on ladders, and arrested them. Across the street, there was a mall. Joe Blasco, the former police officer, was in a van there. He was there to monitor our telephone calls, or our radio calls, but we had a different frequency. He didn't know it. And then we did a crime scene. It took all night, get all that stuff down, but that was it. They were all transported to jail, and eventually were tried and convicted. They were, in 1983, they were formally charged.
And Dennis, the sort of key after effect of this is Frank Collada, and the fact that there's a lot of detail as to why he decided to do this, but you guys worked on him to become a government witness.
How it happened is, birthday was July 4th of '81. Frank was in jail, in Metro Jail there, and we got a communication from our Chicago office, because that's where Tony was from, that they had heard that there was a hit made, it was going to be made on Collada. So Charlie Parsons, our supervisor at the time, got hold of Frank's attorney, said, I want you to meet me over with Frank. He went over to Frank and said, hey, Frank, we got information that there has been a hit put on you and to kill you. And he said, and this was a Friday, and he said, we'll see you, I'm off. And Charlie left, and Frank and his attorney are there, but he's been notified. We have to notify him that it's going to be killed. The next week, Monday, I think it was, Frank called us. Charlie went over there one more time with the attorney, and at that time, Frank told his attorney and everyone he was going to cooperate with us, which he did. And as you noted, very, very, very important to our investigation here, but also throughout the whole Midwest because of the crime that was going on. Incidentally, the Berthas part of it, which I was handling, was more the street crime time. At the same time, we've got the skim going out of the hotels in town, a related case, also Chicago guys, and they all went together, and the guys handling the skim, they got their people, we got ours, and that more or less stopped major organized crime here in Las Vegas at that time. It also affected the Chicago bad guys, Milwaukee, and Kansas City, who were also getting some of the skim. And it severely, just for the agents working here, the hard work they did, were able to stop all that.
Thank you. So it did knock down the Chicago outfit in Las Vegas, and many people would mark around 86 or 88 as the end of traditional organized crime's influence in the casinos. But then we switch gears to Herm. Herm, you come to Las Vegas a few years later, and you're involved in an undercover case that deals with another organized crime group trying to make some inroads here, albeit on a lower scale. Can you tell that story?
Sure, yeah. But before I do, I'd like to tell a Dennis Arnoldy story, if I may. So,
Don't believe it.
I never really had the pleasure or the opportunity to work with Dennis because when I first got here, I was in the office for a couple of months before I went undercover, and I recall that we got a call one time from this guy that was making these allegations about some corrupt police officers in Las Vegas. And basically, when we got down to it, I said, listen, if you really want us to believe you, these details, you need to come in for a polygraph exam. He said, okay, I'll do that. So at that point in Dennis's career, he was the office polygrapher. So I set up a polygraph exam, and when the guy came in, he had this like a little pouch. And we didn't know if the guy was recording us or if he had a gun in there or what. But anyway, we get into the dentist's room there where he does the polygraph. And we're sitting there, and Dennis looks at this pouch that the guy has. And he says, what do you got in the pouch? He said, just my personal stuff. He said, well, open it up. I want to see what you got. The guy said, no, I'm not going to open it up. Dennis says, let me explain something to you. This is my house. We're sitting here right now. I'm enjoying this at this point, you know. And he said, what I say goes on in my house, you have to obey. Either that or get out of my house. The guy goes, he packs up his stuff. He said, I'm out of here, and he leaves. So I look at Dennis, and I'm thinking, wow, that didn't go very far, you know. So it's over, right? So I think I saw Walt Stowe over there. Walt was the ASAC at the time, so about a week or two goes by, and he calls me up to the office. And he said, we had a complaint about you and Dennis Arnoldy from somebody. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, let me read the complaint to you. So he starts, and the guy gives the background and so forth. And then he gets to the part, he said that one agent, that younger guy, Groman, he was a pretty nice guy. But that other guy, Arnoldy, he's so old and mean, he should retire immediately. You remember that, Dennis? Thank you for remembering. Yeah. He hasn't changed. Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah, so when I got here in I guess 1993 from Detroit, I'd worked a lot of undercover stuff, and I was pretty well credentialed in my undercover identity and so forth, and pretty well established, and never really surfaced too much on the East Coast. And coincidentally, when I first came into the Bureau in 1980, the Bureau really didn't work undercover stuff. I mean, it was rare. And some of you FBI guys that have been around for a while recall, Hoover didn't like that. And so I came in a few years after he died, and we were just starting to get into it. In fact, I remember when I was at the training academy, the big undercover case of Abscam, if you recall that, had just broke, and it involved some undercover agents who were portraying themselves as wealthy Arab sheiks, and they were paying off congressmen for various things. So, anyway, I kind of gravitated toward the undercover thing, and I remember my Pittsburgh office, my first office, I stumbled into an undercover operation. And the head of the office there said, listen, we're going to do this operation, and we've had something going on down on the East Coast and in Florida for a period of time, and these guys have been undercover for about 4 or 5 years. And everything that you're going to experience dealing with the mob, these guys have already experienced. He says, so I want you to go down there and kind of hang out with these guys. Yeah, great trip to Florida. I'm in Pittsburgh. It's January. Yeah, sign me up. So I fly down there and I meet these guys, and I really kind of thought they were. I mean, they acted like gangsters. They looked like gangsters. They talked the talk. And this one guy's name was Joe Pistone, and I remember talking to him and. So I'm kind of picking his brain and so forth, and picked up a few tips. And I'm just thinking, basically, it's not that big of a case, But later on, when I saw the movie Donnie Brasco, I realized that Joe Pistone was Donnie Brasco. So kind of cut my teeth down there. It was kind of interesting, I didn't have anything to do with the operation, but it was interesting. So anyway, when I got here in 1993, I was pretty well equipped to go undercover. And at about shortly thereafter, about the same time, the Los Angeles La Cosa Nostra, who really, they were kind of, I don't know. They weren't the hardcore gangsters like you would see back east, but they were certainly dangerous, and they were bona fide La Cosa Nostra. And a guy by the name of Carmen Milano, who was the underboss of the Milano crime family out of L.A., had come here with a couple of his crew members, and we had an informant that was, all these informants. You got to have a guy in an operation, like this, with dealing with the mob. You got to have a Fat Tony, and so this guy was Fat Tony. And he was from New York. He was very New York. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. One of these guys. And so I'll never forget when I went to meet him for the first time, this informant. We were down on one of the casinos. I think it was Samstown, down on Boulder Highway. And so I meet him, and this guy. And I had my undercover vehicle was a little Jaguar convertible, almost looked like a go-kart, right? And so this guy comes waddling out, and he weighs 500 pounds. And so I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, no way is this guy going to fit in this car. So I get in the car, and he goes, hey, okay, let's go. I want to show you around. I said, oh, okay. So I had to put the top down on the car. It's like 48 degrees outside or something. So he gets in the car, and I'm looking at the car, and the car's like this going down Boulder Highway. It was so weird that Metro pulled us over, and they go, "Hey, there's something wrong with your car there," and but it was Fat Tony. So we had a great. He was probably the best informant we ever had, and he was probably the worst informant. Very, very high maintenance, right, Walt? I mean, just incredibly high maintenance. But anyway, I got paired up with him, and he's running around and had a lot of connections from Mulberry Street in New York. He talked the talk, and he looked the part, and he could drop a lot of names, knew a lot of people. So he was great. Ultimately, what we ended up doing is over behind the Rio. Kind of between the Rio and the Gold Coast, in that little shopping area back there, the Bureau set up a kind of a storefront sort of a thing, and it became a mafia hangout. And we called it Sea Breeze. For whatever reason, somebody came up with the name Sea Breeze. And we had a little kitchen in there, and so all these mobsters or wannabes would come in there and they'd hang out, and we had it all wired with video and sound. And Carmen Milano started coming around, the underboss. And so I was in place at that time. And just prior to meeting Carmen Milano, one of the things that was going on nationally with the Bureau was the Teamsters Union was surprisingly involved with some of these mob guys nationally, and they would come into these convention centers, and when they would break down these huge exhibits, electronics or whatever, that stuff was all insured, and a lot of it would just come up missing, and nobody would say anything about it. We're talking millions of dollars worth of stuff, and it was going on here in Las Vegas. So I ended up meeting one of the Teamsters guys who was involved in the convention center, and so we decided to set up a theft. And so he stole a truckload of shirts from the, what do they call that, the Magic Convention. It's a men's apparel guild thing they have. I think they still have it every year. And so he was able to steal a truckload of shirts. I mean, I had more shirts. I had like $80,000 worth of shirts. Silk shirts, camouflage shirts, leather shirts, you name it. I had all these shirts, and we had a warehouse. So we put them in the warehouse, and I pay the guy off, and all of a sudden I get a phone call from a guy by the name of Pete Caruso, who was a local gangster, kind of a bad guy. And he said, hey, listen, we need to talk to you. Come over. It's like a scene out of The Godfather or something. Got this guy by the name of Caruso. He calls me and he said, you know Alex Gambino? He's got this fruit place over here off of Procyon. I want you to come over here and talk to us. So I go over there. And apparently the word got out that I'd pulled off this theft. And so when I walk in, I see Carmen Milano sitting there. He's not saying a word, but I knew who he was. I'd seen him in photographs and so forth. And so during this meeting, he says, Carmen doesn't talk at this point, but Caruso and Tony Angeletti, or the Tony, Fat Tony, is there. And so they're talking to me about this theft. And all of a sudden, Carmen Milano opens his mouth, and he said, you know the guy that pulled that off for you, that Teamster guy, his name was Shorty. He said, he's one of our guys. I said, oh, really? I didn't know that. He said, well, listen, since he's one of our guys and you pulled off this big theft with him, we're partners. And I'm thinking, man, I couldn't have written this script any better, right? I'm wearing a wire. I got like $5,000 in my pocket, and I'm going, this is unbelievable. I can't believe this is happening. So I said, okay, I get that. So what are we talking about? He said, we figure you probably got about $60,000 worth of shirts. So you owe us a third of that. And I said, Mr. Milano. He said, how do you know my name? So I turned to this guy, Tony. I said, he told me. So anyway, make a long story short, we strike up a deal where I'm going to be his partner in crime at that point. And again, it's great because I'm wearing a wire and I've got the money. And so I just took advantage of that situation, and I just pulled out. I had like $5,000. I just gave him $5,000. So he was real happy. He was very impressed with that. And so we became fast friends after that point. And so the case went on and on and on.
How does it summarize? Maybe we should summarize it, how it all turned out.
Well, it turned out great. There were a lot of bumps in the road, one of which involved me and my family. And, ordinarily, they wouldn't take a deep undercover operation and have somebody assigned who actually lives in the town. But because of the opportunity, me coming here, I was kind of a fresh face. And they did have another undercover agent. He didn't quite work out, so they just wanted me to kind of fill in until they could get something more permanent. And as it turned out, once I met Carmen Milano, I was in. But one of these people had inadvertently discovered where I lived, for real. And so at that point, we had to go through a lot of different machinations that we had to do with the Bureau. I actually had to make my house look like it was for sale, and we did a lot of different things. I had to move, and actually had to hide and go into hiding for about 2 years until the case was able to break. But ultimately,
Lived apart from your wife for how long?
I did. I actually had to live apart. We would have conjugal visits occasionally, but you didn't expect that, did
No,
you?
I didn't.
Neither did they.
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. Unfortunately, we could talk about this all day like the last group, but let's wrap it up, Dennis, with your last
quickly,
comment.
Tony Spilotro and all that, if you've seen the movie Casino, you get some idea of what was going on. And of course, movies take liberties with things, but they had a pretty good image of Las Vegas in 1980, and they did it very well. Also, Frank Colado rolled. I interviewed him all over the country, probably for 2-3 years. In 1986, we indicted Tony and 16 other people for various crimes. We went to the day I arrested Tony, myself and Mark Casper and Charlie Parsons arrested him. We came into the old post office. It was just crowded with attorneys and newspaper and people with big video cameras. We went to the elevator. Channel 13's video guy had a big camera on. His door opened. He swung it and hit me in the head. Tony Spilotro grabbed my arm and said, "You okay? Come on, get in here." And he pulled me into the elevator so I'd be okay. So I thought it was a nice gesture anyway. But he was tried in early of '86. It was a hung jury because 2 jurors did not want to participate. It was retried. It was going to be retried in June. I got a call from Chicago saying they didn't know where Tony was. No one knew where he was. I called Frank Collada, who was in jail, and I said, Tony and his brother are missing. His words out of his mouth, they're both dead. And I said, are you sure? And he says, yeah, they're dead. And they were right. 2 weeks later, or in June, they found our bodies in a cornfield in Indiana. So that was the end of the Spilotro brothers. And from that time down, Chicago influence in Las Vegas just dissipated. And I just wanted to add that, that's all.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis. And let's have a round of applause for our group, this group. So now we're going to bring up our third and final group, and this is Steve Martinez and Aaron Rouse, while we get the transition going here. So now we're moving into the 21st century. So we've moved forward, advanced into the current century. All right, I'm going to start with Steve to my immediate left. Steve is currently the Senior Vice President of Global Security for MGM Resorts and also a board member of the Mob Museum. He oversees all corporate security functions and works closely with property security teams to assist in the development of company-wide best practices. From 1987 to 2013, he served in the FBI. He was a special agent in charge of the Las Vegas field office from 2006 to 2009 and was the assistant director in charge of the Los Angeles field office. He concluded his FBI career as the executive assistant director for the science and technology branch at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Steve Martinez. And moving the chronology all the way forward, to our far left is Aaron Rouse, who's appointed special agent in charge of the Las Vegas field office in 2016. He began his career with the FBI in 1996 and was first assigned to the Washington field office, where he worked violent crime and was on the Joint Fugitive Task Force and the Violent Crime Reactive Squads. In 2014, he was appointed section chief for the clandestine operations section in the counterintelligence division at FBI headquarters. Before entering the FBI, Rouse was a trooper in the New York State Police. Please welcome Aaron Rouse. All right, so we may touch on organized crime a little bit in this segment, but a lot of things happened at the beginning of this century that changed the way the FBI did business a little bit. And I thought I'd start with Steve to talk about really how things evolved after about 9/11 and how things evolved after 9/11.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, just a pleasure to talk to you. And I got to start by saying that I did a lot of things in the FBI, but I never had a fat Tony informant. So, look, the FBI started to transform, of course, after 9/11, and there were just so many things going on. The 9/11 Commission, the director was meeting and his staff were meeting on a daily basis, getting feedback about what direction the FBI needed to go. I think Bob Mueller had a pretty good idea of where he wanted to take it. But some of the things that occurred that preceded my arrival here in Las Vegas was, first of all, a complete reordering of the priorities of the FBI. So absolutely counterterrorism was number one, counterintelligence number two. Cyber started to come up because, that was what was coming on. It's not that we weren't working organized crime cases or violent crime cases, some of the traditional work, but there was a huge sea change in what the focus was. And that had an impact on what the Las Vegas office looked like when I arrived. So on arrival, we had a joint terrorism task force. It's not that didn't happen in the FBI prior to 9/11, but it was in the larger cities. It was a pretty limited deployment. But by that time, every field office had a joint terrorism task force. And that included having state, local, federal law enforcement all working together. Everybody cleared to the same level an FBI agent would be, top secret, had access across all of our databases so that our partners had the same information we did. We knew that that was part of the connecting the dots piece, and we knew that we had to leverage law enforcement across all levels. And so, for instance, in Las Vegas when I arrived, there were 2 Metro sergeants assigned to that task force, and they had full access and the same responsibilities as an FBI agent. Of course, counterintelligence was a big thing, and there are lots of assets here between the test site, Creech Air Force Base, and of course Nellis, and all of the supporting companies that support those types of activities. We knew we were a threat environment for our adversaries, so there was a lot of work going on there. That runs under the radar. You don't see that in the news very often, but that was a big part of it. And then I mentioned cyber. There was a cyber task force that actually stood up pretty early in the game here in Las Vegas. I think they were ahead of times. And so when I came on board, I was just coming off an assignment as I ran the cyber division for the FBI. I was actually deputy assistant director, but I was the acting director for a year. So for all intents and purposes, I was running cyber for a year and a half. So, you know, those were kind of the things that were coming on and the responsibilities that we had that were a little bit different. There were still the traditional cases and traditional work, but the focus was very, very much in those areas that I just mentioned. At that time also, as part of the post-9/11 recommendations that the Bureau had to put into place, was to form field intelligence groups. And so Las Vegas had formed a field intelligence group. We were still in a build mode when I came on board, and that meant that we had to populate a new unit that had a different responsibility than the way intelligence was done in the past. In the past, you had some assistants assigned to squads who kind of did on-the-job training, and they were good, but they supported very specific cases, and they did not contribute broadly to the larger intelligence community. That all changed. So now what we had was a group that did support our cases, but also their responsibility was to look at the threats in our particular area and report that into the intelligence stream across the whole intelligence infrastructure of the United States. You know, the 17 agencies that had some intelligence responsibility. So we had a seat at the table now, and we had that connectivity with the rest of the intelligence community. So when we were addressing counterterrorism, counterintelligence issues like that, cyber, we were major players now, and that was a big change with the FBI.
That's really interesting. And I think what's interesting when we were talking in advance of this, you mentioned that one of the other, this sounds very different from that one of these other big situations that happened while you were here was this, we had the Great Recession, right? And the real estate industry collapsed here in Las Vegas, and you had a lot of mortgage fraud going on. And this doesn't sound like the sexy international terrorism that everybody wants to work on, but this became a big, big deal here.
It did, and it's really an interesting story given the context that I just laid out, because no question, our priorities had changed. So white-collar crimes were not that same priority they used to be. But we were also asked, especially through those field intelligence groups, to take a really, really hard look at what are the particular crime problems that are affecting your community. And so this kind of caused a little bit of a U-turn, and it was interesting just culturally in the FBI at the time. I had a really, really good white-collar crime supervisor, Scott Hunter, who's now retired and is actually a PI here in town, who just saw that we were getting lots and lots of complaints, and that whole upswell of mortgage fraud had started in town. And, you know, many of you experienced all that. I certainly did, because I bought a house in 2006, so the rest is history. And so what happened was that the director of the FBI had started these quarterly calls where he would group about 5 different offices in different regions, and he would basically grill us on, okay, have you assessed your threats? What are you working? How are you deploying your resources? And is it in alignment with national priorities? So at that time, we knew we saw this huge, huge wave of mortgage fraud coming at us, and Scott really did a great job in assessing that. And we actually pitched in one of those meetings with the director that this is something we need to address. This is going to affect our community in a big way. That did not go over real well on the first try. But we were told also that we were supposed to be assigning our resources according to the threats that we were dealing with in our community. So I did. I assigned 2 organized crime agent positions to start developing this mortgage fraud, mitigation. And the strategy was to stand up a task force with a lot of our other partners. I immediately got a call from the organized crime section saying that you can't do that. Well, I managed to circle back to the bosses back east and convince them that, look, we really have to be in this game. In 2008, we started that task force. And by the 12, 13, by that time, we had generated cases where hundreds of millions of dollars of loss. And I know there was one takedown that involved 126 different subjects. The interesting thing about this is we didn't go after individual home purchasers. These were people that were in the industry, whether they were on the real estate end or loan officers or whatever. They were the ones that were in conspiracies to not just buy and flip and, burn a house, but to do that at scale. And so just an incredibly important thing to be doing for the community because of the huge threat that it meant to our financial well-being here. And it became the model for the whole country.
This problem started to creep up all over.
Yeah, and so Las Vegas was the first one out of the box to have a mortgage fraud task force, and you roll the clock forward another year and a half, every field office did. Scott Hunter went out and did his road show all over the country to help other field offices stand up that capability.
I want to switch over to Aaron for a minute now. This is real time now. The FBI, you're in charge of the office now. So there are a couple of things that, in particular, we talked about discussing tonight. One is domestic terrorism. In other words, after 9/11, we're thinking about international terrorism. Now we're seeing domestic terrorism as a priority. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys have done and what you are doing?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me up here. I appreciate it. And I think I can speak for a lot of people. I'd rather have the retired guys come back up here and tell stories. I could listen to you guys all night long. Fantastic stories. But on a less happier topic, domestic terrorism is on the rise nationwide. We've seen an uptick in the development of groups and the coordination between groups that previously hadn't talked to one another or worked with one another. And that's a concerning thing. But the good news is that along with that rise in people that are interested in a strong anti-government, anti-law enforcement fervor, we have spectacular partnerships, especially here in Nevada. Many of you who have heard me speak before have heard me say that the partnerships that we have here among all of the agencies are the very best I've ever experienced in over 30 years of law enforcement and 25 years in the FBI. That should be a very confidence-building thing for the community. And to highlight that success is the JTTF, our Joint Terrorism Task Force, that is consistently looking for the next thing that's coming from the domestic terrorist front. You're not going to defeat the ideology because they firmly believe that the government is coming to take their guns or to do some sort of oppressive action against them. And they feel that their actions are justified, whatever it may be. We saw that come to a head last year during the civil unrest, where a group called the Boogaloo Boys had decided that they wanted to firebomb police vehicles and other buildings in downtown during the civil unrest. As a result of some spectacular work by the part of the JTTF, the agents, the analysts, and some fantastic undercover work, we were able to identify all of the members, identify where they were going to go, what they were going to do, and stop it before it happened. literally they were on their way to go and do exactly what they said they were going to do. But the community was never in any danger because the FBI had them completely surrounded. And when they went to put together their explosives, Molotov cocktails, we made the arrest. They're going to have their day in court, but I feel confident knowing the evidence of what it is that they'll be found guilty and they'll be held accountable for their actions. But this is a prime example of proactive law enforcement. That is the best case scenario for any agency that does law enforcement, to stop something before it can happen, not simply be there in the aftermath when it already has occurred. This is just one example of the proactive law enforcement that goes on in this community. I could give you a bunch more, but take that message and let others know that we're on the job here and our goal is to stop it before it happens.
Aaron, what is your sense of, the sort of, for lack of a better term, the anti-government kind of movements around the country? How big a deal is that in Las Vegas versus other parts of the country?
Every field office has some representation, some more than others. We have a fairly diverse state, and there's a lot of areas where people think that they can hide because they feel like they're out in the middle of the desert, they're out in the mountains, and nobody's watching. Well, we are. And we're interested in making sure that if you have a certain set of beliefs, that's fine, no problem. But if those beliefs turn into an advocacy or action towards violence, that's a problem.
Very good. Another focus, it's a focus, for the DEA, it's a focus for the FBI, is drug trafficking. It's sort of just, with fentanyl now, it's such a deadly product. You had recently a very big bust in Las Vegas, a big arrest, a big action here where you brought down a number of important people involved in drug trafficking and in money laundering. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Operation Moneymaker. I am very proud of that operation, multi-year operation off of our organized crime squad. More than 30 countries, the partnerships with the host nation law enforcement entities from all of those countries, cooperating, participating, finding a way within each other's laws and code of conduct to make sure that we're doing things the right way, not just for the FBI here in the United States for prosecution here, but also for the potential prosecution of our partners wherever those countries may be located. And it was a fantastic effort. We had many of those countries were represented here for the takedown day. We had a lot of local arrests. We ended up doing a press conference with the U.S. Attorney's Office highlighting the success. But when you're talking about the international transfer of drugs, we're talking about MDMA, we're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about a number of deadly drugs that permeate our streets. To be able to stymie the flow of that in over 30 countries, along with choking off the money laundering supply routes so they can't wash their money. It's not like you can simply just go over to the next money launderer that you think you might be able to trust, especially after all of the efforts that were thrown into this. And the case isn't over. Spin-off cases have gone on, and the continuation of our impact on that particular case is going to reverberate for quite some time. Organized crime still exists in many forms, but here in Vegas, we just kicked it one.
Excellent. So we're using all of our allotted time tonight, which I expected, but we do have time for a few questions. And if anybody has any questions for these, I know we could have questions for all the agents who appeared, but we probably need to focus on these two since they're up here. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Shakayla will come over and bring the microphone to you. Did I see a hand? Yes.
Yes, for the current SAC, what are you guys doing regarding human trafficking? Is that I would assume it is a big problem here?
Thank you so much for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
We are doing, you may have seen some of our billboards around town. We partnered with a billboard company to get the message out to people who are transiting through Las Vegas. Now, a lot of people ask, is Las Vegas a hub of human trafficking? I wouldn't call us a hub, but we definitely have human trafficking issues that take place here, like many jurisdictions do. We've been focused on educating and bringing awareness to the public to be able to spot what human trafficking looks like. And with the number of visitors that we have here, we have had a tremendous amount of success at getting tips into the FBI about potential human trafficking situations. We're not just talking about adult human trafficking, we're also talking about the human trafficking involving children, which I think we can all agree is abhorrent. We're highly engaged in identifying the human traffickers and holding them accountable. Every year, there's a huge sweep to try to identify and rescue children who are being trafficked. I'm very proud to say that Las Vegas has led the FBI in the number of child rescues multiple years in a row. That doesn't happen because it's just the FBI. It happens because we have an engaged public that is now getting the information about human trafficking and is acting on that information. They're standing up and having the courage to notify the local police or the FBI when they suspect it. And it allows us to merge all those partnerships to be an effective fighting force to hold the traffickers accountable and to rescue the people being trafficked.
We can take another question. Here's one over in the corner.
How is the FBI using social media as a weapon against maybe hate groups or any other kind of illicit activity? Are you very active on social media trying to find people, or do you use that as part of your everyday tactics now?
Well, we wouldn't use social media as a tactic so much as we use it as an information platform. And we have a presence on social media to inform the public of things that we believe that they would find important, or soliciting their assistance and identifying those people that may be committing crimes across the gamut. And that social media presence has brought forth a lot of great cases, some that we're currently working. So our presence is more along the lines of, here's what we're looking for, or we're trying to help other partners. Many times we will do like retweets of what partner agencies are looking for, because we have a pretty large following in the FBI. And we like to leverage that to the benefit of all of our partners. But that's our social media presence. We do it as an information providing, and also to solicit assistance from the public in helping us identify criminals, find missing persons. We used it recently to recover an endangered juvenile that was safely located in California. We're very pleased about that. That tells us it's working, and we're going to continue to use that in that platform.
I think let's have time for one more if somebody has a question. Here's one, last one.
Can I ask the older gentleman about Bill Coulthard, Jeff?
Oh, you'd probably want to, I don't know if you guys can speak to Bill Coulthard. You can ask him afterward. Why don't we do that? Why don't we wrap it up here, because we have been going for an hour and a half, and it's just been amazing. And what I'm thinking about is we've spoken about approximately 1% of what the FBI field office in Las Vegas has done over the last 60 years. So please, a round of applause for all of our folks. Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve.